Consider the vastness of time stretching both before and after your existence. Your life occupies but a fleeting moment in the cosmic calendar of existence. The universe has existed for billions of years and will continue for billions more. Your time here is merely a brief flash of consciousness in an otherwise indifferent cosmos. The thought that we will be forgotten is not meant to frighten, but to liberate us from unnecessary burdens. It reminds us to focus on what truly matters in the brief time we have. Throughout human history, countless individuals have lived, loved, and disappeared without leaving a trace. Even the greatest empires and most remarkable achievements eventually fade into obscurity. Our modern obsession with legacy and remembrance blinds us to a fundamental truth about existence. Everything is temporary, including memory itself. Part 1. The erosion of memory. Time erodes all memory like waves gradually wearing down mountains to sand. This process is as natural as the changing of seasons or the movement of stars across the night sky. Consider how the most famous individuals from just 5 centuries ago are known by only a fraction of humanity today. Their achievements, which once seemed world-changing, have been reduced to footnotes in history books rarely read. The names that dominated human consciousness for centuries, Alexander, Caesar, Cleopatra, are now merely characters in stories, stripped of their true essence and complexity. We know almost nothing of their inner lives, their doubts, their moments of quiet reflection. Consider how many billions of people have lived and died, their names and stories completely lost to history. Each one had dreams, fears, loved ones, and a unique perspective on the world, all now vanished without trace. Even the pharaohs who built monuments specifically designed to ensure eternal remembrance are mostly forgotten as individuals. We may know their titles and see their tombs, but their personalities and daily struggles have disappeared like morning dew. Your great-grandchildren might remember your name or perhaps display your photograph. But what about 10 generations from now, when your DNA will be so diluted as to be practically non-existent in your descendants? The memories of you will fade like footprints on a beach as the tide comes in, gradually becoming smoother until no trace remains. This is not a tragedy, but the natural order of things, the way the universe maintains its balance. Even digital records which we imagine might preserve us forever will eventually become corrupted or unreadable as technologies change. Or perhaps they will simply be ignored, lost in the vast ocean of accumulated human information. Part 2. The liberation of insignificance. There is profound freedom in accepting your cosmic insignificance. This realization removes the burden of having to achieve something monumental merely to justify your existence. When you understand that you will be forgotten, you can stop living for others' approval or historical judgment. You become unburdened by the weight of legacy that has crushed so many souls throughout human history. You become free to live authentically in the present moment, focusing on the quality of your experiences rather than their historical impact. This shift in perspective transforms how you measure the value of your days on Earth. This is not nihilism, but liberation from the prison of legacy that modern society has constructed around us. It is permission to live for the experience of living itself, not for its documentation or remembrance. The weight of eternity lifts from your shoulders when you accept that your name will eventually disappear from human consciousness. You no longer need to carve your identity into the fabric of history to validate your existence. What remains important is how you experience your life, the quality of your consciousness during your brief time here. The love you give and receive becomes valuable for its own sake, not as part of some eternal ledger. Consider how many people throughout history have sacrificed their happiness and authentic desires on the altar of remembrance. They lived not for themselves, but for an imagined future audience that would never truly know them. By accepting the inevitability of being forgotten, you reclaim ownership of your limited time. You can finally ask what truly brings you fulfillment, not what will impress posterity. This perspective allows you to find meaning in small moments: a conversation with a friend, the taste of food, the feeling of sunlight on your skin. These experiences need no justification beyond themselves. They are not means to some greater end, but complete and perfect in their temporary existence, just as you are. The beauty of a sunset is not diminished because it will soon be gone. Perhaps its impermanence is what makes it precious. Part 3. The Democracy of Oblivion. Oblivion is the great equalizer, the final democracy that awaits us all. Kings and beggars, geniuses and ordinary people all share this ultimate fate of being forgotten. There is something profoundly comforting in this universal journey toward erasure that awaits every human being who has ever lived. It connects us across time and space in a shared human condition. The pharaoh who commissioned the Great Pyramid and the slave who built it are equally forgotten as individuals today. Their bones are equally dust, their voices equally silent. The most powerful emperor and the most humble farmer from 2,000 years ago now exist in the same state, as faded echoes at best, complete non-entities at worst. Their differences, which seemed so vast and important during their lifetimes, have been erased by the passage of time. Even those rare individuals whose names have survived, Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, exist now primarily as symbols and ideas, not as the complex human beings they once were. The actual persons have been replaced by cultural constructs that serve our current needs. We know almost nothing of their daily lives, their personal quirks, or the sound of their laughter. The essence of who they really were has been lost to time, just as yours will be. Understanding this shared destiny can dissolve the artificial boundaries we create between ourselves and others. Status, wealth, fame, all these distinctions that seem so important now will eventually mean nothing. When you truly internalize that both you and your adversaries will be equally forgotten, many conflicts lose their seeming importance. What remains is the quality of consciousness you experience during your brief time in existence. Part 4. The Illusion of Permanence. We build monuments of stone, write books, create art, all in an unconscious rebellion against our temporary nature. These efforts to achieve immortality reveal our deep discomfort with the truth of our impermanence. Consider the ancient library of Alexandria, once the greatest collection of human knowledge in the world. It burned, and countless irreplaceable works were lost forever, their authors doubly erased from memory. Modern digital archives seem more permanent, but they too are vulnerable to technological obsolescence and decay. How many early websites have already disappeared, their creators' digital legacies erased? Even our most enduring creations are temporary against the vast backdrop of cosmic time. The pyramids themselves will eventually crumble to dust, as will all human achievements. This illusion of permanence causes us to invest tremendous energy in projects that future generations may neither appreciate nor remember. We sacrifice present joy for a legacy that will inevitably fade like morning mist. When you accept that nothing you create will last forever, you can create for the joy of creation itself. You can build sandcastles with the full knowledge that the tide will come, and find beauty in that process. Part 5. The weight of significance. The belief that we must matter to the universe creates an unbearable psychological burden. It demands that we justify our existence through achievement, recognition, and lasting impact. This burden crushes many under the weight of perpetual inadequacy, feeling they haven't done enough to deserve remembrance. It transforms life from an experience to be lived into a resume to be judged. Consider how many deathbed regrets center not on failing to achieve greatness, but on missing simple moments of connection. Few regret not building bigger monuments to themselves as they face their final moments. The dying rarely wish they had worked harder to secure their legacy or gained more recognition from strangers. Instead, they wish they'd spent more time with loved ones, expressed their feelings more openly. The paradox of significance is that by desperately pursuing it, we often sacrifice the very experiences that would make our lives meaningful. We trade presence for prominence, connection for commemoration. When you release the need to matter to history, you can finally matter to yourself and those around you in the present. This is the true liberation that comes from accepting your eventual erasure from memory. Part 6. The witness fallacy. We often believe that experiences only matter if they are witnessed and remembered by others. This fallacy leads us to document moments rather than fully living them, always performing for an imagined future audience. Consider how many people experience beautiful vistas through phone screens, more concerned with capturing than experiencing. The moment is sacrificed for a record that few will ever see and eventually none will remember. The value of an experience does not depend on its documentation or remembrance by others. A moment of profound joy or connection does not become less real when it passes without record. The sunset remains beautiful whether or not it is photographed, and your experience of it is complete in itself. It need not be validated by future remembrance to have been worth experiencing. When you release the need for witnesses to your life, you can fully inhabit each moment as it comes. Your consciousness becomes the sufficient and complete recipient of your experiences. This shift transforms ordinary moments into sacred ones, complete in themselves without need for external validation. The bird song needs no audience to be perfect, neither does your life. Part 7. The memory paradox. Those who are most remembered by history are often those who cared least about being remembered. They were absorbed in their pursuits, fully present in their lives, rather than obsessed with their legacy. Consider figures like Vincent van Gogh, who died believing himself a failure, his work unappreciated. He painted not for posterity, but from an inner necessity, a compulsion to express his unique vision. The paradox extends to personal relationships as well, where those who most desperately seek to be remembered are often forgotten first. It is authentic presence and genuine connection that creates lasting impressions, not the desire for them. The teacher who changed your life likely did so by being fully present and engaged, not by seeking to make a permanent mark. They gave without expectation of return or recognition. True impact often comes as a byproduct of absorption in meaningful activity, not as its goal. When you release the need to be remembered, you become free to pursue what truly matters to you. This authenticity is ironically what might make you memorable to those who know you, even as cosmic forgetfulness remains your ultimate fate. But by then, it will no longer matter to you whether you are remembered or not. Part 8. The continuous present. The human mind divides time into past, present and future, but this is merely a useful fiction. In reality, we only ever exist in an ever-moving present moment, with memory and anticipation as mental constructs. Our obsession with being remembered is really an attempt to extend our existence beyond this continuous present. It is a denial of the fundamental nature of time and consciousness. When you fully accept that you exist only in the present moment, being forgotten ceases to be threatening. If existence is only ever now, then what does it matter if your now is remembered in some future now? The quality of your consciousness in this moment becomes the sole measure of your life's value. This realization transforms how you allocate your precious attention and energy. Consider how much anxiety about legacy pulls us out of the present moment, where life actually happens. We sacrifice our only real existence, now, for an imagined future that we will not experience. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can finally arrive fully in the present moment. You can stop living as a character in a story to be told later and start living as a consciousness experiencing now. Part 9. The Burden of History. Consider how many people throughout time have been crushed by the weight of remembered expectations. Children of famous parents, successors to great leaders, all burdened by the shadow of what came before. Being remembered imposes obligations on those who come after, creating prisons of expectation that can stifle authentic living. Perhaps being forgotten is a gift we give to future generations, freeing them from the tyranny of our remembered greatness. Even on a personal level, being remembered too well by loved ones can become a burden to them. Excessive grief keeps the living chained to memories, unable to move forward into new experiences. There is wisdom in cultures that practice limited mourning periods, acknowledging that life must continue for the living. The healthy integration of loss requires a partial forgetting, a gentle release of what once was. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you release others from the obligation to remember you. This is perhaps your final act of love, freeing those who survive you to live fully in their own present. You give them permission to remember you less as time moves forward, to allow your memory to gently fade as it naturally will. This release is not abandonment, but a final gift of freedom. Part 10. The Cosmic Perspective. From the perspective of cosmic time, all human history is but an eye blink, all human achievements momentary. The sun will eventually expand and engulf the earth, erasing all physical traces of human civilization. Even the most enduring monuments, the most renowned names, will disappear completely, as if they never existed. This is not a pessimistic view, but simply the reality of cosmic scales and processes. The universe, with its billions of galaxies and trillions of stars, continues regardless of whether humans record or remember their brief time here. Our species is unimaginably young in cosmic terms, likely to be extinct long before the universe reaches middle age. When you contemplate these vast timescales, individual legacy becomes almost comically insignificant. What does it matter if you are remembered for 100 years or 1,000 in the face of billions? This cosmic perspective does not diminish the value of your experiences, but places them in their true context. The universe does not need to remember you for your life to matter. The meaning of your existence is not diminished by its temporary nature, just as the beauty of a flower is not lessened by its brief blooming. Perhaps true wisdom lies in embracing your cosmic insignificance while finding profound meaning in your subjective experience. Part 11. The Self-Illusion. The very self that fears being forgotten is itself a temporary construction, constantly changing and impermanent. The you that exists today is not the same you that existed 10 years ago or will exist 10 years hence. Your cells have replaced themselves, your memories have been altered, your beliefs and values have shifted. In a very real sense, your past selves have already been partially forgotten, even by you. We maintain an illusion of continuous selfhood through narrative, telling ourselves stories about who we are. Yet these narratives are selective, omitting far more than they include about our actual experiences. Much of your own life has already been forgotten by you, lost to the natural limitations of human memory. The self that fears oblivion is already experiencing it continuously, moment by moment. By recognizing the fluid, constructed nature of selfhood, the fear of being forgotten loses much of its power. If there is no permanent self to be remembered, what exactly are you trying to preserve in memory? This recognition allows you to hold your identity more lightly, to stop clinging to a consistent narrative of self. You become free to reinvent yourself continually, released from the prison of your own previous definitions. Part 12. The Attention Economy. Modern society has commodified attention and remembrance, turning them into scarce resources to be bought and sold. Social media platforms monetize our fear of being forgotten, promising a kind of digital immortality. We measure our worth in likes, shares and followers, as if these metrics could somehow protect us from oblivion. This commodification of memory creates a frantic competition for a resource that is ultimately meaningless. Consider how much vital human energy is wasted on ensuring visibility and remembrance rather than on living. The pursuit of viral moments and personal branding consumes countless hours that might be spent in direct experience. We trade the richness of unrecorded private experiences for the hollow validation of public documentation. The calculation seems clear. Better to be seen briefly than to live deeply without witnesses. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can opt out of this exhausting economy of attention. You reclaim your experiences as your own, rather than as content to be consumed by others. This is a revolutionary act in an age that measures human worth by metrics and reach. You declare your independence from the tyranny of being remembered, choosing depth over breadth of impact. Part 13. The Freedom of Anonymity. Throughout history, many of the most profound and meaningful contributions have been made anonymously. Consider the unknown architects of ancient cathedrals, or the nameless authors of folk tales that endure today. These creators worked not for personal glory or remembrance, but for the work itself, or for ideals beyond themselves. Their anonymity granted them a freedom from ego that allowed their work to speak for itself. There is a special kind of liberation in contributing without signature, in giving without recognition. The anonymous gift is perhaps the purest form of giving, untainted by the expectation of return or acknowledgement. When you accept that you will be forgotten, you can approach this state of anonymous contribution during your lifetime. Your actions become valuable for their intrinsic worth, not as entries in the ledger of your remembrance. Consider how the need for recognition corrupts even our most noble impulses, turning generosity into self-promotion. When this need dissolves, all action becomes potentially sacred, worthwhile for its own sake. The question transforms from, "Will this make me remembered?" to, "Does this express what matters most to me?" This shift leads to a life of greater authenticity and often, paradoxically, greater impact. Part 14. The Myth of Originality. Our fear of being forgotten often manifests as a desperate search for originality, for a unique legacy. Yet true originality is largely a myth, as all human creation builds upon what came before. Every inventor, artist and thinker stands on the shoulders of countless forgotten predecessors who made their work possible. Our contributions are less individual monuments than small additions to a vast collective endeavour. The most beloved stories, discoveries and creations often emerge multiple times independently across cultures. This suggests they arise not from individual genius, but from common human experience and shared consciousness. Even when we believe we're being entirely original, we are actually channeling collective wisdom, remixing cultural inheritances. Our most personal insights often turn out to be universal, already discovered by others throughout time. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can release the exhausting pursuit of unprecedented originality. You become free to create from authentic impulse rather than from the desire to stake a permanent claim. This acknowledgement of your place in the great continuity of human creation is deeply humbling and profoundly liberating. You participate fully in the collective project of humanity without needing to plant your flag upon it. Part 15. The quality of attention. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your life far more than how long you will be remembered. A life of scattered attention, always grasping for more, is impoverished regardless of its legacy. Conversely, a life lived with full presence and deep awareness is rich regardless of whether it leaves any trace. Perhaps the only true wealth is the capacity for complete attention to your experience as it unfolds. Consider how often the pursuit of legacy draws our attention away from the present moment. We sacrifice the depth of now for an imagined breadth of impact across time. This trade rarely satisfies, as the present moment continually slips away unlived while the future promise of remembrance never quite arrives. The attention you give to securing your legacy is attention you cannot give to living your life. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can redirect your precious attention to where it actually creates value. You can give yourself completely to your experiences without holding back to document or promote them. This full presence creates a quality of life that needs no external validation or continuation in memory. It is complete in itself, needing nothing beyond the moment of its existence to justify its worth. Part 16. The inheritance of forgetting. Each generation forgets most of what the previous generation knew, remembered, and valued. This natural process of forgetting is essential to cultural evolution and renewal. Imagine if we remembered everything our ancestors did, believed every notion they held, maintained every practice they followed. We would be crushed under the accumulated weight of history, unable to find our own way forward. Forgetting is not just inevitable, but necessary, creating space for new ideas, practices, and values to emerge. It allows each generation to remake the world according to their present needs and understandings. Just as individual memory requires forgetting to function properly, collective memory requires it to remain vital and relevant. To be forgotten is to contribute to this necessary clearing away, this making of space. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you participate consciously in this vital process of cultural renewal. You release your grip on the future, allowing it to become what it needs to be rather than what you would preserve. This generosity toward the unborn is perhaps the greatest gift you can offer to the future. You give them the freedom to create their world without the burden of remembering yours. Part 17. The intimacy of impermanence. There is a special intimacy in experiences shared with the full awareness that they will not last. This is why sunset gatherings, last days before departures, and deathbed conversations often have such emotional intensity. The knowledge of impending separation infuses the moment with a poignancy that more permanent arrangements rarely achieve. In acknowledging the temporary nature of an experience, we often access its deeper dimensions. Consider how the Japanese concept of mono no aware celebrates the beauty of impermanence. Cherry blossoms are beloved precisely because they bloom briefly and fall, not despite this fact. Their transience heightens appreciation, creating a more refined aesthetic experience than permanent flowers could provide. The awareness of ephemerality creates a tender, bittersweet quality that enriches rather than diminishes. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can bring this quality of awareness to your entire life. Each experience becomes more precious, more worthy of full attention, knowing it will not endure. This is not a mournful recognition, but a deepening one, infusing ordinary moments with extraordinary significance. You become more available to the strange miracle of existing at all, however briefly and forgettably. Part 18. The currency of remembrance. In our culture, remembrance has become a form of currency, a payment for actions we deem valuable. We offer it as reward and withhold it as punishment, assuming its universal desirability. "You will be remembered for this" can be either promise or threat, depending on the context. We speak of paying tribute as if memory were a tax owed to those deemed worthy. This economy of remembrance creates perverse incentives, rewarding actions that attract attention rather than those that create genuine value. History remembers conquerors more than healers, the dramatic over the nurturing, the loud over the subtle. Our systems of remembrance often preserve precisely what we should transcend: violence, domination, excess. Meanwhile, the quiet acts of compassion that sustain human dignity go largely unrecorded. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you free yourself from this distorted economy of action. Your choices can be guided by intrinsic value rather than their memorial potential. This liberation allows you to count among your most significant achievements things that no one else will ever know about. The private act of compassion becomes as meaningful as the public act of heroism. Part 19. The fallacy of control. Our desire to be remembered represents a fundamental misunderstanding about control. We cannot determine how or if future generations will remember us, no matter what we do. Those who are remembered are often remembered for reasons they would not have chosen, sometimes in ways they would have abhorred. History recasts us according to its own narratives beyond our control. Consider how figures like Vincent van Gogh or Franz Kafka achieved fame only after death, when they could not experience or direct it. Their attempt to control their legacy would have been futile, as is ours. Even those who carefully craft autobiographies or establish foundations in their names cannot determine how future generations will interpret or remember them. The meanings of our lives are not ours to fix permanently. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you release this illusion of control over your posthumous existence. You acknowledge that how or whether you are remembered is not yours to determine. This recognition returns you to what you actually can influence, the quality of your lived experience and your impact on those around you now. You reclaim agency over what matters, your life as it is lived, not as it might be remembered. Part 20. The Ethics of Presence. There is an ethical dimension to accepting that you will be forgotten, a moral clarity it brings to action. When remembrance is no longer the reward, genuine values can guide your choices more directly. Actions taken for their own rightness rather than for recognition often have a purer quality, unburdened by calculation. Perhaps the most ethical action is that which would be chosen even if no one ever knew about it. Consider how many moral compromises are made in the pursuit of legacy or in the name of some greater future good. We justify present harms for imagined future benefits, sacrificing what is for what might be remembered. When you accept that you will be forgotten, this calculation shifts toward the immediate impact of your actions on real beings. The distant future can no longer be used to justify present cruelty or neglect. This ethics of presence asks not how will history judge this action, but what does this action express about my values now? It measures worth not in potential memorial currency, but in immediate alleviation of suffering, creation of joy. By releasing your grip on future judgment, you become available to present ethical demands. You act not for history, but for the lived reality your actions create in this moment. Part 21. The Wisdom of Uncertainty. True wisdom often begins with acknowledging what we cannot know or control. The future reception of our lives falls squarely into this category of fundamental uncertainty. We cannot know who, if anyone, will remember us or what meaning they will make of our existence. This uncertainty extends even to how we ourselves will be transformed by future experiences. The mind rebels against this uncertainty, creating fantasies of posthumous appreciation to comfort itself. We imagine future generations understanding us better than our contemporaries do. Yet this imagined future audience is merely a projection of our current desires for recognition, not a reality we can count on. The wisest approach is to hold these fantasies lightly, recognizing them as the mind's attempt to create certainty where none exists. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you embrace this fundamental uncertainty about your legacy. You acknowledge the limits of your knowledge and control, a recognition that paradoxically expands rather than diminishes your freedom. This wisdom of uncertainty allows you to act more decisively in the present, unburdened by calculations about posthumous judgment. You become available to the surprise and wonder of an unpredictable life, rather than clinging to predetermined narratives of remembrance. Part 22. The Poetry of Passing. There is a poignant beauty in things that do not last, a poetry in passing that permanent monuments cannot achieve. Consider the sand mandala, painstakingly created grain by grain, then ceremonially destroyed upon completion. Its impermanence is not incidental, but essential to its meaning, symbolizing the transient nature of all phenomena. The mandala's destruction is not a tragedy, but the completion of its purpose. Our lives have this same potential for temporal poetry, complete not despite but because of their temporary nature. The sand mandala of your existence need not endure to have been worth creating in exquisite detail. Perhaps your life achieves its fullest meaning precisely in its passing away, in its return to the elements from which it temporarily emerged. This completion through dissolution is not failure but fulfillment. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you open yourself to the poetic dimensions of impermanence. You can create your life with the same devotion and attention as the mandala maker, knowing its eventual dissolution is part of its beauty. This perspective transforms your relationship to endings of all kinds, revealing their essential role in the poetry of existence. You begin to recognize that nothing would have meaning without its counterpoint in silence, in absence, in forgetting. Part 23. The Alchemy of Acceptance. Accepting that you will be forgotten transforms the heavy lead of existential dread into the gold of present awareness. This alchemical acceptance does not happen intellectually, but through a gradual embodied recognition. It begins as an uncomfortable truth that we resist, yet through contemplation becomes a source of unexpected liberation. What initially appears as loss reveals itself as gain, as space cleared for authentic living. This transformation is not immediate but unfolds gradually as the implications of forgetting sink from mind to heart. The process resembles grief in its stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Many never reach this final stage, remaining trapped in bargaining, trying to negotiate a limited immortality through achievement or reproduction. Yet those who complete the journey find a quality of presence unavailable to those still fleeing from the reality of impermanence. True acceptance is not resignation or defeat, but a profound realignment of values and attention. It is not that you stop caring, but that you start caring about what truly matters, the quality of conscious experience available only now. This alchemical shift cannot be forced or rushed, but emerges naturally from honest contemplation of your temporal nature. The more deeply you understand that you will be forgotten, the more completely you can be present. Part 24. The Inheritance of Anonymity. Most of what we value in civilization comes to us from people whose names we will never know. The inventors of the wheel, of written language, of counting, of cooking with fire, all anonymous benefactors. Our most fundamental technologies and cultural practices emerged not from individual genius, but from collective intelligence across generations. The greatest gifts to humanity have been passed down without signatures. This anonymous inheritance reminds us that impact and remembrance often exist in inverse proportion. The more fundamental the contribution, the more likely it is to become common property, separated from its originators. Consider language itself, perhaps humanity's greatest creation, a masterpiece with no single author. Its brilliance lies precisely in its ownerless nature, its availability to all without credit or recognition. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you join this noble tradition of anonymous contributors to human flourishing. Your acts of kindness, your small discoveries, your moments of creation feed into the collective inheritance without needing your name attached. This participation in anonymous giving may be the most profound form of contribution, one that asks nothing in return, not even remembrance. You become part of the invisible foundation upon which all visible human achievement rests. Part 25. The Futility of Fame. Fame, our culture's promise of extended remembrance, delivers far less than it advertises. Those who achieve it often find themselves more isolated, more misunderstood than they were in obscurity. The famous person becomes a screen onto which others project their own desires and judgments, losing authentic connection. They are remembered not as they are, but as others need them to be, their actual selfhood buried under projection. Consider how fame transforms even the living into symbols, flattening their complexity into easily consumed narratives. The famous exist primarily as constructs in the minds of strangers, rarely as full human beings. Is this remembrance, this reduction to symbol, really what we desire when we fear being forgotten? Perhaps what we truly seek is not to be remembered, but to be known, to be witnessed in our full humanity. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you release the pursuit of this hollow immortality of fame. You can seek instead the deeper satisfaction of being truly known by a few rather than falsely remembered by many. This shift in aspiration from breadth to depth of connection often leads to a life of greater authenticity and joy. The love of one person who sees you clearly may be worth more than the admiration of millions who see only a construct. Part 26. The Wisdom of Trees. Consider the quiet wisdom of trees, which seasonally release their leaves without resistance or regret. They do not cling to past growth but let it go, making space for new emergence when the time comes. This natural cycle of growth, release and renewal contains profound wisdom for human consciousness. Perhaps we too could learn to release our attachments to past selves, accomplishments, and the desire to be remembered. Trees contribute to the forest ecosystem even after death, their decomposing trunks nurturing new life. They do not disappear but transform, their elements reconfigured into new growth. This cycle offers a different model of continuation than the linear immortality humans often seek. It suggests that our truest continuation lies not in being remembered as we were, but in becoming part of what comes after. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this natural wisdom of cyclical transformation. You recognize that your contributions to the world continue not through memory, but through their integration into the ongoing flow of life. This perspective brings a deep ecological comfort, a sense of belonging to processes much larger than individual identity. You participate fully in the great cycle of generation, contribution and release that characterizes all natural systems. Part 27. The Liberation of Letting Go. Our fear of being forgotten reflects a deeper attachment to fixed identity, to the illusion of permanent selfhood. We cling to the story of who we are, seeking its continuation beyond our physical existence. Yet this clinging creates a fundamental suffering, a resistance to the natural flow of impermanence that characterizes all phenomena. Perhaps our greatest freedom lies not in being remembered, but in releasing the need for continuous identity. Consider how much energy is consumed by maintaining and projecting a consistent self-image. We carefully curate our presentation to others, ensuring coherence with our previous expressions. This consistency requires constant vigilance, a perpetual self-monitoring that prevents authentic response to the present moment. The burden of maintaining this persistent identity extends into our concern for posthumous reputation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you practice the fundamental spiritual art of letting go. You release not just the need for future remembrance, but the rigid self-definition that underlies it. This liberation allows for greater spontaneity, authenticity and presence in your remaining time. You become available to continuous transformation rather than fixed identity, to becoming rather than being. Part 28. The Horizon of Being. Our existence has a horizon, a limit beyond which we cannot see or control. Death forms one obvious boundary, but forgetting constitutes another equally significant horizon. Beyond this second horizon, our influence continues in ways we cannot perceive or direct. Like light travelling through space long after its source has been extinguished, our actions propagate beyond our awareness. This horizon of influence extends far beyond the horizon of remembrance. People may forget your name while still being shaped by your actions, words and creations. A kind word spoken to a child might alter their development without them ever remembering who spoke it. An idea shared might transform understanding without its origin being recalled. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you acknowledge this horizon, while recognizing that impact transcends memory. You contribute to the future knowing you will not be credited, like dropping stones into water without witnessing their distant ripples. This perspective allows for a more generous relationship to influence, one unconcerned with recognition or control. You give without attachment to outcome, content to know that effects continue beyond the horizon of both your perception and your remembrance. Part 29. The Paradox of Legacy. Those who most desperately seek to create a lasting legacy often produce the least enduring work. Their focus on posterity's judgment prevents the authentic expression that might actually speak to future generations. Consider how many forgotten monuments litter the landscape, built by those determined to be remembered. Meanwhile, works created for immediate purposes often outlast their creators' expectations. This paradox of legacy suggests that meaningful continuation emerges not from grasping, but from letting go. The artist deeply absorbed in their craft, rather than its reception, often creates work of lasting significance. The parent focused on their child's present needs rather than creating a dynasty often establishes the strongest continuation. Impact flows not from demanding remembrance, but from full engagement with present purpose. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you resolve this paradox through surrender. You create, build, teach, or nurture for the inherent value of the activity, not its memorial potential. This non-attachment paradoxically increases the likelihood that what you create will have lasting value. You access a quality of authenticity available only to those who have released the need for posthumous validation. Part 30. The Economy of Attention. Human attention is our most precious and limited resource, more valuable than time or money. How we allocate this finite resource determines the quality and character of our lives. Yet, much of our attention is consumed by concerns about how we appear to others, both now and in the imagined future. This preoccupation with image and legacy diverts enormous attentional resources from direct experience. Consider how often your thoughts drift to how current actions will be perceived rather than to the actions themselves. This divided attention prevents full presence, creating a perpetual state of partial engagement with life. Even seemingly immersive experiences can be contaminated by the documenting mind, always framing the present for future remembrance. We live as if our primary purpose were to create evidence of having lived. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can reclaim this squandered attentional wealth. You become free to invest your full attention in direct experience rather than its documentation or reception. This reallocation represents perhaps the greatest available increase in life quality, a transformation of every experience through complete presence. You discover that attention fully invested in the present multiplies in value, creating a richness unavailable to the perpetually distracted mind. Part 31. The Intimacy of Mortality. Our shared mortality and ultimate forgetting create a profound bond between all humans across time. No matter our differences in status, achievement, or recognition, we all share this final equality. There is an intimate connection in this universal vulnerability, a tenderness in our common temporal nature. Perhaps our deepest kinship with others lies not in what makes us exceptional, but in what makes us temporary. Consider how the acknowledgement of mortality often dissolves artificial boundaries between people. In moments of crisis or grief, superficial differences fade as fundamental human connection emerges. The recognition that we are all subject to the same cosmic laws of emergence and dissolution creates a natural compassion. We see in others not competitors for limited immortality, but fellow travellers on a brief journey. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you access this intimacy of shared transience. You recognize others not as witnesses to your significance, but as companions in temporal existence. This shift creates the possibility for more authentic connection, unburdened by the need to impress or secure remembrance. You become available for a quality of relationship possible only between those who have made peace with their temporary nature. Part 32. The Gift of Obscurity. Consider the special freedom available to those who create without an audience, who act without witnesses. There is a purity in private creation, an authenticity in actions performed beyond the gaze of others. The unpublished poet, the basement musician, the solitary dancer all access a dimension of expression unavailable under observation. Their art serves no purpose beyond itself, existing for the experience of creation rather than its reception. This freedom of obscurity extends beyond creative pursuits to all domains of life. Private joy, unwitnessed kindness, solitary contemplation, all have a special quality precisely because they make no claim on memory. They exist completely in their moment of occurrence, asking nothing of the future. Perhaps the most authentic expressions of your true nature emerge when you have released the need for recognition entirely. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can access this gift of obscurity during your lifetime. You become free to explore, create, and act from intrinsic motivation rather than for external validation. This liberation often unleashes capacities and expressions previously suppressed by the concern for reception. You discover that creation without the burden of legacy has a special lightness and authenticity that remembered work often lacks. Part 33. The Ecology of Memory. Human memory, both individual and collective, functions as an ecosystem with limited capacity. For new memories to form, old ones must fade, creating the necessary space for fresh experience. This natural process of forgetting is not a failure, but an essential feature of healthy cognitive functioning. Without it, we would be crushed under the accumulated weight of remembered experience. This ecology of memory extends to cultural remembrance as well. For new cultural expressions to emerge, old ones must recede from active engagement. No culture could remain vital if it maintained equal attention to every expression from its past. The continuous clearing of attention allows for cultural renewal and adaptation to changing circumstances. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you recognize your place in this natural ecology of remembrance. You understand that your fading from memory makes space for new life, new creation, new understanding. This recognition allows you to see forgetting not as erasure, but as participation in the ongoing renewal of consciousness. You contribute to the future precisely by not occupying space in its memory, by making room for what needs to emerge. Part 34. The Museum of Memory. Imagine human culture as a vast museum with limited gallery space. For new exhibits to be displayed, others must be moved to storage or deaccessioned entirely. No matter how vast the museum, choices must be made about what remains in public view and what recedes from attention. These curatorial decisions are inevitable given the constraints of space and attention. The contents of this museum change continuously as each generation's curators make different selections. What one era considers essential to remember, another may view as irrelevant. No permanent place in the galleries can be secured through any action or achievement. Even the most prominent exhibits eventually make way for new acquisitions. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you release the desperate desire for permanent exhibition in this museum of cultural memory. You recognize that your temporary display, if it occurs at all, is sufficient. This acceptance frees you from the suffering caused by craving immortality through remembrance. You become content with your brief moment in the light, knowing that your removal makes space for others to be seen. Part 35. The freedom of finitude. Our temporal limitations, including both death and forgetting, create the conditions for meaningful human existence. Without these boundaries, experience would lose its preciousness, its special intensity. Consider how endless time would drain urgency from action, how guaranteed remembrance would cheapen contribution. It is precisely our brief, forgettable nature that makes each moment potentially significant. Infinite existence and permanent remembrance, far from being desirable, would likely lead to a kind of living death. Without the pressure of limited time and the liberation of eventual forgetting, we might never act decisively or authentically. Our temporal constraints force choices, create focus, and establish priorities that give shape to human life. They transform mere duration into biography, mere persistence into character. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you embrace the freedom that finitude provides. You recognize temporal limitation not as a curse, but as the very condition that makes meaningful action possible. This acceptance allows you to perceive the extraordinary gift of bounded existence, the opportunity to craft significance precisely because your time is limited and your remembrance temporary. You discover that meaning emerges not despite, but because of your eventual disappearance from memory. Part 36. The Whisper of Reality. Reality speaks most clearly in whispers, in subtle experiences that resist documentation and sharing. The most profound truths are often the most difficult to preserve in memory or communication. Consider your moments of deepest insight, connection, or presence, how they resist capture in words or images. These essential experiences seem to evaporate upon attempt to grasp or preserve them. Perhaps this resistant quality reveals something fundamental about the nature of meaningful experience. It suggests that reality in its purest form is meant to be encountered directly rather than preserved. The attempt to secure these experiences for posterity often destroys precisely what made them valuable. Their essence lies in their immediacy, their ungraspable presence. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this whispered truth of reality. You stop trying to capture experience for transmission and begin to receive it more fully as it occurs. This shift from preservation to presence often reveals dimensions of experience previously missed in the effort to remember. You discover that reality offers itself most completely to those who have stopped trying to possess it beyond its moment. Part 37. The Mirage of Digital Immortality. Modern technology offers new promises of extended remembrance through digital preservation. We archive our thoughts, images, and expressions online, imagining them permanently accessible to future generations. Yet this digital persistence is itself an illusion, vulnerable to technological obsolescence, data corruption, and the sheer volume of competing information. The digital afterlife proves just as ephemeral as previous forms of remembrance, only with different timescales and failure modes. Consider how many early digital formats are already inaccessible, how many once popular platforms abandoned. The permanence promised by digital tools requires continuous maintenance and migration that rarely materializes. Even if your digital traces survive technically, they will disappear practically beneath the ever-rising tide of new information. Your carefully preserved expressions will become effectively invisible, lost in an endless ocean of content. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can use digital tools without being seduced by their promises of immortality. You can share and connect in the present without the illusion that these traces constitute meaningful continuation. This clear-eyed approach to technology allows for its authentic use as a means of present connection rather than future preservation. You discover that digital expression, like all human communication, finds its truest value in immediate reception rather than permanent record. Part 38. The Mirror of Mortality. Our awareness of mortality and eventual forgetting can serve as a clarifying mirror, revealing what truly matters. This mirror, when faced directly, shows the difference between essential and superfluous concerns with brutal clarity. Consider how quickly priorities shift when confronted with limited time, how petty grievances and status concerns suddenly appear meaningless. The same clarification occurs when we truly internalize our eventual disappearance from memory. This mirror of mortality reveals not just what matters, but who we are beyond social masks and achievements. It strips away the accumulated identities we construct, leaving only our essential nature. Perhaps our truest self emerges only when we have released all concern for how we will be remembered. In this letting go, we discover what remains when the temporary construction of social identity falls away. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can use this mirror regularly, rather than avoiding its reflection. You can check your choices against the clarity it provides, asking, would this still matter if I knew I would be completely forgotten? This practice gradually aligns your life with what you truly value, rather than with what others might remember. You discover that many pursuits fall away under this scrutiny, leaving space for what genuinely matters to your deepest self. Part 39. The Currency of Experience. In the economy of a finite life, experience is the only true currency. Not accomplishment, not possessions, not memory, but the quality of conscious awareness as it unfolds. This is the one value that cannot be transferred, banked or preserved beyond its moment of occurrence. It exists only in its immediate manifestation, making it both the most ephemeral and most real asset we possess. Consider how much of this precious currency is squandered in pursuit of proxy values, status, security, recognition. We trade present experience for symbolic substitutes that ultimately cannot satisfy our deeper needs. The hope of being remembered often motivates this exchange, as we sacrifice immediate richness for imagined future significance. Yet no amount of posthumous recognition can compensate for a life of divided attention and deferred presence. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can invest your experiential currency more wisely. You stop spending present awareness on future remembrance that will never provide adequate return. This reallocation of your most precious resource often creates an immediate increase in life satisfaction. You discover that experience fully received in the moment provides wealth that no amount of remembrance could match. Part 40. The Gift of Insignificance. There is a special lightness available to those who recognize their cosmic insignificance. This recognition, far from being depressing, can liberate us from the crushing weight of self-importance. Consider how exhausting it is to maintain the fiction that your existence has cosmic significance, that your actions ripple meaningfully through eternity. This burden of imagined importance creates a perpetual pressure that prevents natural unfolding. From the perspective of geological time, let alone cosmic time, all human striving appears equally momentary. The distinction between famous and forgotten becomes meaningless against the backdrop of billions of years. This radical equalization of all human lives can be experienced as either terrifying or liberating, depending on how deeply it is understood. When fully integrated, it creates a buoyant freedom unavailable to those still striving for significant remembrance. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you receive this gift of insignificance with gratitude rather than resistance. You experience the liberation that comes from releasing the need to matter beyond your moment. This acceptance paradoxically increases your capacity for joy, presence, and meaning within the brief span you have. You discover that insignificance, embraced fully, transforms from existential threat to unexpected blessing. Part 41. The Quantum of Presence. Presence comes in indivisible units, complete moments of undivided attention. It cannot be partially achieved or multitasked. Either consciousness is fully here, or it is elsewhere. Consider how rarely we experience this undivided state, how often our attention is split between present experience and thoughts of past or future. This division creates a perpetually diluted quality of awareness that prevents full engagement with life. The concern for how we will be remembered constitutes one of the most common diversions from presence. It pulls attention from direct experience into imagined future perspectives on the present moment. This split consciousness creates the strange phenomenon of living as if already looking back, experiencing now as if from a future vantage point. We become spectators to our own lives, commentating rather than experiencing. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you remove one of the primary barriers to complete presence. You release the habitual division between experience and its imagined future remembrance. This unification of attention creates access to a quality of consciousness ordinarily available only in rare moments of flow or meditation. You discover that undivided presence constitutes a form of wealth unavailable to those still striving to secure their place in memory. Part 42. The Meditation of Mortality. Contemplating your eventual forgetting constitutes a form of meditation with transformative potential. Like traditional memento mori practices, it uses death awareness to clarify values and priorities. Yet it goes beyond physical mortality to consider the complete dissolution of your social identity, your remembered self. This extended contemplation often reveals attachments and fears normally hidden from awareness. This meditation becomes most powerful when practiced not intellectually but experientially. Rather than thinking about being forgotten, you imaginatively inhabit that reality, feeling its implications. You visualize a world where no one remembers your name, where all trace of your passing has disappeared. As resistance to this vision arises, you observe it with compassionate attention, neither indulging nor suppressing the fear. With regular practice, this meditation gradually transforms your relationship to remembrance and identity. Initial terror often gives way to acceptance and eventually to a sense of liberation. The meditation continues working even when not actively practiced, quietly restructuring your values and perception. You discover that what initially appeared as a terrifying void gradually reveals itself as free space for authentic living. Part 43. The Phoenix Principle. For new life to emerge, the old must be completely consumed, transformed through dissolution. This principle operates throughout nature, from forest fires that release seeds requiring extreme heat to germinate. Consider how the nutrients of previous generations become the literal substance of new growth. Nothing is truly lost, but rather reconfigured into fresh forms of life and consciousness. This Phoenix principle suggests a model of continuation very different from being remembered as we were. It points to transformation rather than preservation as the natural mode of influence across time. Perhaps your truest continuation lies not in being remembered as a fixed identity, but in becoming raw material for what comes after. Your ideas, actions and creations decompose like fallen leaves, releasing their nutrients to nourish new growth. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this natural process of transformation. You release the desire to preserve your current form in memory, allowing for complete conversion into new life. This surrender to transformative dissolution often brings deep ecological comfort. You discover that influence without remembrance, like nutrients without source recognition, may be the most profound form of continuation. Part 44. The Ethics of Inheritance. What we leave behind is not primarily our names, but the effects of our choices on those who follow. This ethical inheritance operates independently of remembrance, shaping future possibilities regardless of attribution. Consider how decisions made by unnamed ancestors continue to structure your life through institutions, technologies, and altered landscapes. Their influence persists not through memory, but through transformed material conditions. This perspective shifts focus from symbolic to substantial inheritance, from remembrance to consequence. It asks not, will they remember me, but how will my choices affect their lives? This ethical reorientation often leads to more considerate decision-making, concerned with actual impact rather than perceived legacy. The desire for good remembrance can be replaced by the more meaningful desire for beneficial effect. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can focus on creating a beneficial inheritance regardless of attribution. You become free to invest in changes that may not be traced to you, but will nonetheless improve conditions for those who follow. This shift from name to anonymous contribution often increases both the scale and quality of your impact. You discover that influence without credit may be the purest form of giving to the future. Part 45. The Liberation from Judgment. Our concern for how we will be remembered often reflects anxiety about posthumous judgment. We want not just to be remembered, but to be remembered well, approved of by history. This concern for judgment extends beyond the grave, creating a kind of eternal performance anxiety. We live as if perpetually on trial before an imagined future jury. Consider how this anticipated judgment constrains authentic expression and action. We edit our lives according to imagined future standards and values that we cannot possibly predict. This creates a strange temporal confusion, where present choices are governed by speculative future criteria. We become plagued by the question not just what is right or actually, but what will be considered right. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you release yourself from this posthumous judgment anxiety. You recognize that no future tribunal will evaluate your choices because your choices will be unknown. This liberation from anticipated judgment creates space for more authentic decision-making based on present understanding. You discover that moral clarity emerges more readily when freed from the distorting influence of imagined future opinion. Part 46. The Authenticity of Anonymity. Something special happens to human expression when the possibility of credit or blame is removed. An authenticity emerges that is often absent from signed or attributed communication. Consider the different quality of anonymous donations, unsigned graffiti art, or messages in bottles set adrift. These expressions often have a purity and directness missing from work created with attribution in mind. This authenticity of anonymous expression suggests a relationship between ego attachment and distortion. When we create with our names attached, we inevitably filter our expression through concerns about how it will reflect on us. This filtering process, while sometimes helpful for quality control, often removes the most original and vulnerable aspects of our communication. We say what we think we should say rather than what we truly wish to express. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can access this quality of anonymous authenticity even in your signed work. You create as if your name were already detached from your expression, freeing it from the distortion of ego protection. This approach often releases capacities for originality and vulnerability, previously suppressed by reputational concerns. You discover that your most powerful expressions emerge when you have released all concern for how they might reflect on your remembered self. Part 47. The Poverty of Posterity. The imagined audience of posterity is a poor substitute for genuine human connection. Creating for future remembrance rather than present communication often leads to work that connects deeply with neither. Consider how many monuments feel cold and impersonal compared to artifacts created for immediate use and enjoyment. The latter, paradoxically, often speak more clearly across time precisely because they were embedded in real human relationship. This poverty of posterity as audience extends to all forms of human expression and action. Work created primarily to secure remembrance often lacks the vitality of work created from present necessity or desire. The teacher who teaches to transform lives now, rather than to be remembered as a great educator, often achieves both aims, while the one focused on legacy often achieves neither. Present impact and future memory maintain this inverse relationship across domains. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can create for real people rather than imagined posterity. You communicate with those actually available to receive your expression, not with theoretical future audiences. This grounding in present relationship often infuses your work with an authenticity and immediacy that paradoxically gives it lasting value. You discover that the path to meaningful impact often passes through complete surrender of concern for remembrance. Part 48. The Joy of Recognition. When we release the need for future remembrance, we become available to a deeper form of recognition. Not recognition of our names or accomplishments, but recognition of our essential nature by those who truly see us. Consider the profound satisfaction of being understood by even one person, of having your inner reality acknowledged. This immediate recognition contains a value that no amount of posthumous fame could replicate. This joy of recognition operates independently of scale, sometimes more powerfully in intimate settings than public ones. The understanding glance of a friend who knows you well can provide more satisfaction than applause from thousands who know only your public persona. Perhaps what we truly seek is not to be remembered by many, but to be recognized by a few. Not continuation of our names, but confirmation that our subjective reality was witnessed and understood. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can redirect your desire for recognition toward this more fulfilling immediate form. You can seek the joy of being seen now rather than remembered later. This reorientation often leads to deeper investment in present relationships and more authentic self-expression. You discover that the satisfaction of being truly known by a few during your lifetime far outweighs the hollow promise of being nominally remembered by many afterward. Part 49. The Wisdom of Humility. True humility emerges not from belittling yourself, but from accurate self-perception within the vastness of existence. It is simply the recognition of your actual size and significance in the cosmic context. Consider how our expected remembrance requires a grossly inflated sense of our importance relative to the billions of other humans who have lived. This inflation distorts perception and creates unnecessary suffering when reality fails to conform to our outsized expectations. Humility in this sense does not diminish but clarifies your unique value and contribution. It removes the distortion of imagined cosmic significance, revealing your actual precious specificity. This right-sizing of self-perception often brings immediate relief from the burden of sustaining an inflated self-image. The exhausting effort to secure immortality through remembrance can be released into a more grounded sense of purpose. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you cultivate this wisdom of humility as a daily practice. You continuously adjust your self-perception to more accurately reflect your temporary, limited but genuinely valuable nature. This practice gradually transforms your relationship to achievement, failure, praise, and criticism. You discover that humility, far from diminishing your capabilities, enhances them by removing the distorting influence of ego protection and inflation. Part 50. The Eternal Present. Perhaps eternity is not endless time, but timelessness, the complete inhabitation of the now. This eternal present becomes available precisely when we release concern for continuation. Consider how moments of complete presence often contain a quality of timelessness, an escape from the usual experience of duration. These moments, paradoxically, emerge most readily when we've accepted our temporal nature rather than trying to transcend it. This eternal present represents not an extension but a deepening of experience, a vertical rather than horizontal immortality. It suggests that the richest continuation lies not in being remembered across time, but in accessing the timeless dimension available within each moment. Perhaps what we truly seek in wanting to be remembered is this quality of significance that exists outside of linear time. If so, the path lies not in securing memory but in deepening presence. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you clear the primary barrier to experiencing this eternal present. You stop sacrificing depth of now for imagined breadth of continuation. This reprioritization often reveals dimensions of experience previously obscured by temporal anxiety. You discover that eternity is not something to be attained after death through remembrance, but something to be experienced during life through presence. Part 51. The Courage of Impermanence. True courage may lie not in building monuments, but in creating beauty that will disappear. It takes greater bravery to invest fully in the temporary than to grasp for artificial permanence. Consider the ice sculptor who works knowing their creation will melt, or the mandala maker who plans its destruction from the beginning. These artists demonstrate a special valor in their wholehearted commitment to the ephemeral. This courage of impermanence extends beyond art to relationships, experiences, and life itself. It requires strength to love fully, knowing loss is inevitable, to celebrate moments that cannot be preserved. Perhaps the greatest act of courage is to live with complete presence and commitment, while accepting the temporary nature of all experience. This paradoxical combination of full engagement and non-attachment represents a profound spiritual achievement. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you develop this rare form of courage. You become capable of creating, connecting and experiencing without the safety net of remembrance. This courageous acceptance often unleashes capacities for joy and meaning previously suppressed by insecurity. You discover that vulnerability to total erasure, embraced fully, transforms from weakness into strength. Part 52. The weight of memory. Memory itself can become a burden, both individually and collectively. The accumulation of the past can grow so heavy that it prevents movement into the future. Consider cultures paralyzed by remembrance of ancient glories or grievances, unable to adapt to changing conditions. Their attachment to being remembered in certain ways constrains their ability to evolve and respond. This burden extends to personal memory as well, where past achievements or failures can overshadow present possibilities. We become prisoners of our remembered selves, unable to act in ways inconsistent with established identity. The weight of our personal history limits spontaneity and authentic response to current circumstances. We sacrifice present possibility on the altar of consistency with our remembered past. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can begin releasing this weight during your lifetime. You become free to reinvent yourself continuously without concern for consistent narrative. This liberation from the burden of accumulated identity often brings unexpected vitality and creative possibility. You discover that forgetting, both of yourself and by others, creates essential space for renewal and transformation. Part 53. The Mathematics of Memory. Consider the mathematics of memory across human generations and cosmic time. If each human is remembered by at most 2 generations beyond their death, even the famous disappear within a few centuries. The sheer volume of human lives ensures that comprehensive remembrance is impossible. For each person remembered, countless others must be forgotten, simply due to the limitations of collective attention. This mathematics becomes even more stark against cosmic timescales. Human civilization occupies an infinitesimal slice of universal time, our entire species a mere eye blink in cosmic history. The probability of any individual human being remembered after the extinction of our species approaches 0. Even if our civilization were to continue for millions of years, the likelihood of your specific remembrance would still be mathematically negligible. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this mathematical reality rather than fighting against it. You acknowledge the natural limits of remembrance without resentment or despair. This acceptance often brings a strange comfort, a sense of rightness in conforming to the natural patterns of existence. You discover that what appears initially as harsh truth gradually reveals itself as cosmic belonging, a participation in patterns larger than individual identity. Part 54. The Joy of Contribution. Perhaps our deepest satisfaction comes not from being remembered, but from knowing we have contributed. This joy operates independently of attribution or recognition, arising from impact rather than credit. Consider the special satisfaction of anonymous giving, of helping without the possibility of thanks. There is a purity to this unattributed contribution that often generates deeper fulfillment than acknowledged giving. This joy extends from material giving to all forms of contribution, ideas shared, support offered, beauty created. The teacher experiences it when former students apply lessons without remembering their source. The artist feels it when their work affects viewers who never learn the creator's name. The parent knows it when values transmitted shape descendants who will never know them personally. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can access this joy of pure contribution. You give without expectation of credit or even remembrance, finding satisfaction in the giving itself. This unconditioned generosity often releases your full capacity for positive impact. You discover that contribution without attachment to recognition may be the most profound form of participation in human flourishing. Part 55. The ownership illusion. Our desire to be remembered reflects a deeper illusion of ownership over our achievements and identity. We speak of my life, my work, my impact, as if these truly belong to us alone. Yet every achievement emerges from countless influences and conditions beyond our control or creation. Our very capacity to accomplish anything depends on inherited language, knowledge, technology, and opportunity. This illusion of individual ownership ignores the collaborative nature of all human creation. Nothing is truly mine to be remembered for, as everything bears the fingerprints of innumerable others. Even our most personal expressions depend on words we did not invent, influenced by ideas we did not originate. The self that seeks remembrance is itself a collective creation, shaped by countless interactions and inheritances. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you begin releasing this ownership illusion. You recognize achievements not as personal possessions, but as moments of channeling collective human capacity. This recognition often brings a deep sense of connection and gratitude, replacing anxiety about remembrance. You discover that belonging to the great flow of human creativity matters more than owning a remembered piece of it. Part 56. The ultimate privacy. Being forgotten grants a final privacy, a return to the uncategorized mystery from which we emerged. After the dissolution of remembrance, we escape definition and judgment, returning to possibility. Consider how remembrance always involves reduction, condensing a complex life into simplified narrative. To be forgotten is to be released from this reduction, restored to the fullness of uninterpreted being. This ultimate privacy represents not erasure, but liberation from the confines of others' understanding. The remembered self is always a construction, a character in others' narratives, rather than the ineffable reality of lived experience. Perhaps what we fear in being forgotten is not non-existence, but the loss of this familiar construction, this known, although limited, identity. Yet in this loss lies the potential return to uncategorized essence, to being rather than seeming. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can anticipate this final privacy with curiosity rather than dread. You recognize it not as punishment, but as release from the constraints of defined identity. This acceptance often brings a quiet joy, a sense of eventual homecoming to unconditioned being. You discover that beyond the apparent loss of being forgotten lies the profound gain of returning to mystery. Part 57. The quantum of influence. Our influence continues in ways disconnected from remembrance of our names or identities. Like quantum particles that affect systems without being directly observed, we shape the future anonymously. Consider how a kind act might alter someone's development without them remembering its source. The effect continues independently of its attribution, sometimes more powerfully than effects linked to remembered sources. This quantum influence operates through complex causal chains beyond our tracking or control. Your actions create ripples that interact with countless other ripples to shape future conditions. The help you give someone might enable their support of another, creating effects 3 or 4 or 50 generations removed from your initial action. These causal threads remain connected even as memory of their origin disappears. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can focus on generating positive influence rather than securing its attribution. You contribute to the great causal web without needing to tag your threads with your name. This shift from attributed to quantum influence often expands your impact by removing the constraints of recognition. You discover that causation continues even where memory fails, creating a form of continuation independent of remembrance. Part 58. The wisdom of trees. Consider trees which contribute their fallen leaves to the forest floor without signature or credit. These anonymous gifts become the very soil from which new life emerges, transformed beyond recognition. The tree does not demand that its leaves be remembered as having come from it specifically. It participates in cycles of growth and decay without concern for individual attribution. This wisdom of contribution without credit runs throughout the natural world. Rivers don't sign the oceans they feed. Clouds don't tag the rain they release. These natural processes suggest a model of influence very different from our human concern with remembered attribution. They point to transformation rather than preservation as the natural mode of continuation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this fundamental pattern of nature. You become like the tree, content to contribute without signature to what comes after. This natural alignment often brings deep ecological comfort, a sense of participating in ancient patterns. You discover that forgetting is not a human cruelty, but part of nature's wisdom, essential to renewal and continuation. Part 59. The illusion of permanence. What we consider permanent merely operates on timescales that exceed our direct observation. Everything from mountain ranges to star systems exists in continuous processes of transformation. Consider how even the most enduring human monuments show the effects of time when observed closely. The pyramids themselves gradually erode, their precise angles softened by millennia of wind and sand. This universal impermanence creates the context for human forgetting, placing it within natural patterns. Our social memory proves no more permanent than our physical structures, subject to similar processes of erosion. Names carved in stone fade just as the stone itself gradually returns to sand. Digital records become corrupted or obsolete, their storage systems subject to the same physical laws of decay. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you recognize your place within these universal patterns of change. You stop fighting against a fundamental quality of existence itself. This acceptance often brings peace through cosmic contextualizing, through seeing human forgetting as one instance of universal impermanence. You discover that what appeared as human failing reveals itself as cosmic process, neither cruel nor kind, but simply the nature of reality. Part 60. The freedom of completion. Perhaps true completion comes not through endless continuation, but through wholehearted acceptance of ending. Like a well-crafted story, a life may find its meaning precisely in having a conclusion. Consider how the beauty of music depends on silence, on notes not continuing indefinitely, but finding resolution. The finale gives meaning to what came before, creating a whole rather than an endless sequence. This aesthetic of completion suggests that being forgotten might be not a failure, but a necessary final cadence. Without this resolution, the composition of a life remains unfinished, suspended in artificial continuation. The acceptance of forgetting provides the closing notes that transform individual moments into a complete composition. It creates the silence that allows the music to be heard as a whole rather than an ongoing process. By accepting that you will be forgotten, You open yourself to this freedom of completion. You become available to the specific beauty of finitude that infinity cannot access. This acceptance often brings a special kind of satisfaction, the sense of participating in a well-crafted whole rather than an endless series. You discover that meaning emerges not despite, but through the acceptance of conclusion, of forgetting as the final resolution of your life's composition. Part 61. The gift of absence. Absence itself can be a gift, creating space for what needs to emerge. Like silence between musical notes, forgetting creates the necessary gaps for new creation. Consider how creativity often requires emptiness, a clearing of accumulated patterns and expectations. Innovation emerges not from crowded memory, but from spaces where previous structures have been partially forgotten. This gift of absence operates at cultural as well as individual levels. Societies experience creative renaissances when freed from the weight of remembered traditions. New art forms emerge when old forms fade sufficiently from active memory to allow experimentation. The partial forgetting of rules and boundaries creates the conditions for their productive transgression. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you offer this gift of absence to future generations. You contribute to necessary clearing, making space for what they need to create. This generosity toward the unborn often brings unexpected satisfaction in the present. You discover that giving through absence, through not occupying future attention, may be as valuable as giving through continued presence. Part 62. The Natural Cycle. Forgetting constitutes not an unnatural tragedy, but part of the basic pattern of existence. Like death itself, it represents not failure, but completion of a natural cycle. Consider how continuous remembrance would create an unnatural state, an accumulation without release. Such eternal preservation would prevent the renewal essential to living systems. This natural cycle operates in individual memory as well as collective remembrance. Our minds continuously forget to make space for new learning and experience. Without this necessary clearing, we would be unable to adapt to changing circumstances or integrate new information. The persistence of every memory would create cognitive paralysis rather than enhanced functioning. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you recognize your place within natural cycles of renewal. You participate consciously in patterns of emergence and dissolution essential to all life. This alignment with natural process often brings deep ecological comfort. You discover that forgetting, far from opposing nature, represents one expression of its fundamental wisdom. Part 63. The Mystery of Influence. Our influence operates through mysterious channels independent of conscious remembrance. Ideas, values, and patterns of behavior pass between generations through pathways we barely understand. Consider how you might use phrases or gestures inherited from great-grandparents you never met. Their influence continues anonymously, shaping you without your awareness of its source. This mystery extends beyond families to entire cultures, where origin points disappear while influences persist. Languages evolve through contributions from countless forgotten individuals. Musical traditions develop through innovations whose creators' names have vanished. The most profound and pervasive influences often operate precisely through this mysterious anonymous continuation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you open yourself to participation in this mystery. You contribute to ongoing human development without needing to tag your specific influences. This anonymous participation often brings a special satisfaction unavailable to those still grasping for attributed remembrance. You discover that mysterious influence, separated from your name and identity, may constitute your most significant and lasting contribution. Part 64. The Trap of Legacy. The pursuit of remembrance can become a trap, distorting decisions and diminishing life quality. We sacrifice present joy for imagined future recognition that rarely materializes as envisioned. Consider how many people realize too late that their quest for legacy led them to miss what truly mattered. They discover on their deathbeds that relationships neglected for achievement leave the greater emptiness. This trap operates with special power in creative fields where concern for posterity can paralyze authentic expression. The writer who creates for imagined future readers often produces less vital work than one who writes from present necessity. The artist who works for the gallery wall or the museum display frequently loses the raw authenticity that might actually merit such placement. The paradox of legacy is that those who pursue it most directly are often least likely to achieve it. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you free yourself from this common trap. You create, build and connect for present value rather than posthumous recognition. This liberation often unleashes capacities previously constrained by legacy anxiety. You discover that acceptance of forgetting, far from diminishing achievement, often enhances it by removing artificial constraints on authentic expression. Part 65. The Equality of Oblivion. In forgetting lies a final equality that transcends all differences in achievement or recognition. No matter how renowned in life, all eventually fade to equal obscurity in cosmic time. Consider how even the most famous historical figures become progressively distant, their details blurring and significance fading. Given sufficient time, even the greatest names become footnotes and finally disappear completely. This equality of ultimate forgetting offers a profound cosmic justice transcending temporary human hierarchies. The pharaoh and the slave, the conqueror and the conquered, reach the same state of non-remembrance. All human striving for superior recognition eventually resolves into this shared anonymity. What seemed like vast differences in remembrance are revealed as temporary variations in a universal process. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this ultimate equality. You recognize the temporary nature of all status differences based on remembrance. This recognition often brings a special humility and compassion toward others still striving for superior recognition. You discover that shared forgetting creates a bond of common destiny that transcends all temporary differences in fame or obscurity. Part 66. The Freedom of Anonymity. There exists a special freedom in anonymity, in action without attribution. When no one knows who is responsible, we act from intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation. Consider the different quality of behavior when we believe no one is watching or will remember. This absence of observation often allows for more authentic expression, unconstrained by concern for reception. This freedom extends beyond immediate anonymity to eventual forgotten status. When we fully accept that all our actions will eventually become authorless, we gain similar liberation. The pressure of performing for posterity dissolves, releasing energy for genuine response to present circumstances. We become available to act from core values rather than concern for how we will be remembered. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can access this freedom of anonymity during your lifetime. You act as if already anonymous, concerned with impact rather than attribution. This shift often releases unexpected creativity and authenticity previously suppressed by reputational concerns. You discover that forgotten status, embraced in advance, creates a special kind of freedom unavailable to those still struggling for remembered recognition. Part 67. The distortion of memory. Even if you are temporarily remembered, that remembrance will inevitably distort who you actually were. Memory, both individual and collective, reconstructs rather than reproduces the past. Consider how historical figures become caricatures, reduced to a few traits or achievements that rarely capture their lived complexity. Even those who knew you personally will remember a version of you that diverges from your experienced reality. This distortion reveals a fundamental limitation in the project of being accurately remembered. Not only will remembrance fade, but while it lasts, it will misrepresent. The you that others recall will never match the you that you experienced yourself. This gap between lived experience and remembered construction cannot be bridged by any amount of documentation or testimony. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you also release the desire for accurate remembrance. You recognize the inevitable distortion in even the most loving memory of you. This double acceptance of both forgetting and distortion often brings unexpected peace. You discover that true continuation lies not in accurate memory, but in honest impact, in how you transform others regardless of whether they remember the source of transformation. Part 68. The dance of remembering and forgetting. Memory and forgetting exist not as opposites but as complementary partners in a necessary dance. Each requires the other to create meaning and enable growth. Consider how creativity emerges from the dynamic interaction between remembered patterns and their partial forgetting. Without some forgetting, memory becomes rigid. Without some memory, forgetting becomes chaotic. This complementary relationship suggests that forgetting serves essential functions rather than simply opposing remembrance. It creates space for new patterns, prevents oversaturation, and enables selective preservation of what proves most valuable. Perhaps forgetting constitutes not the failure of memory, but its sophisticated partner in meaning-making. Without it, memory would lose its selective power and thus its value. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you recognize your participation in this necessary dance. You contribute to both remembering and forgetting as complementary cosmic processes. This recognition often transforms resistance to forgetting into appreciation for its essential role. You discover that being forgotten is not failure or tragedy, but participation in the rhythm that gives remembrance itself its meaning. Part 69. The continuity of elements. Though your name and identity will fade, the elements that comprised you continue indefinitely. The atoms that temporarily assembled into your form will reassemble into countless future forms. Consider how the carbon, oxygen and hydrogen currently constituting your body have previously been part of countless other beings. They have been stars, oceans, dinosaurs, plants, and will continue their journey long after your temporary arrangement dissolves. This material continuity offers a different model of continuation than remembered identity. Rather than persistence of name or story, it suggests persistence through transformation and recombination. Your physical elements will continue to participate in the great dance of matter and energy, taking new forms over billions of years. In this sense, what appears as ending is merely reorganization, the beginning of new configurations. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can shift focus to this elemental continuity. You recognize your body as a temporary arrangement of eternal components. This recognition often brings deep comfort through cosmic contextualization. You discover that forgetting of identity coincides with material continuation, offering a form of immortality very different from the persistence of name or story. Part 70. The renewal of wonder. Perhaps the greatest gift of accepting forgetting is the renewal of wonder in ordinary existence. When we release the need for cosmic significance, the simple miracle of being here at all comes into focus. Consider how our desperate pursuit of remembrance often blinds us to the astonishing improbability of our current existence. We take for granted the extraordinary fact of conscious experience while anxiously seeking its continuation. This renewed wonder extends to all aspects of ordinary life suddenly perceived as miraculous. The taste of food, the feeling of sunlight, the sound of voices, all become extraordinary when seen without the distortion of legacy anxiety. Even difficult experiences gain a strange preciousness when recognized as temporary manifestations of consciousness. Pain itself becomes interesting rather than merely aversive when experienced with full presence. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you clear the primary barrier to this perpetual wonder. You stop taking existence for granted in your desperate attempts to extend it through memory. This shift often transforms ordinary experience from background to foreground, from means to end. You discover that each moment, when fully received, without concern for its preservation, reveals dimensions of wonder previously obscured by anxiety about remembrance. Part 71. The Invitation to Play. Accepting that you will be forgotten extends a special invitation to playfulness and experimentation. When legacy concerns dissolve, the serious business of securing remembrance can be replaced by play. Consider how children, unconcerned with how they will be remembered, access states of complete absorption and joy. Their temporary creations, built without concern for permanence, often contain a vitality missing from adult work. This invitation to play extends to all domains of adult life: work, relationships, creativity. When freed from the burden of creating a memorable legacy, these areas can become fields for genuine experimentation. The professional who stops building a resume and starts solving interesting problems often produces more significant work. The artist who abandons the pursuit of lasting fame for the play of creation often creates more vital art. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can respond to this invitation to playful living. You approach each domain with experimental curiosity rather than legacy anxiety. This shift often unleashes capacities for creativity and problem-solving previously suppressed by seriousness about remembrance. You discover that playfulness, far from opposing achievement, often enables its highest expressions precisely by releasing concern for how achievements will be remembered. Part 72. The Value of Experience. Perhaps the only true value lies in the quality of conscious experience itself. Not its duration, not its remembrance, but its depth and richness in each moment it exists. Consider how a single moment of profound presence might contain more value than years of divided attention. The former creates a depth of experience that needs no continuation to justify its worth. This intrinsic value of consciousness exists independently of its recognition or remembrance. It requires no witness beyond itself to establish its worth. A moment of joy, insight or connection has value simply in its occurrence, regardless of whether anyone remembers it afterward. The experience itself constitutes a complete value proposition needing no external validation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can focus on this intrinsic value of conscious experience. You invest in depth rather than duration, in quality rather than remembrance. This reprioritization often transforms ordinary moments by removing the distraction of legacy concern. You discover that when attention is not divided between experience and its preservation, a single moment can contain more value than years of half-lived time. Part 73. The intimacy of impermanence. Shared awareness of impermanence creates a special intimacy between conscious beings. Knowing that both we and others will be forgotten generates a tender recognition of common vulnerability. Consider how acknowledging mortality often dissolves artificial boundaries between people. In the face of shared transience, our fundamental kinship becomes more apparent than our differences. This intimacy extends beyond human relationships to connection with all temporary phenomena. The cherry blossom, the sunset, the passing season all become kin in their shared impermanence. Perhaps our deepest bond with reality lies not in what persists, but in what passes, in our common participation in emergence and dissolution. This recognition of kinship with the transient often generates a special tenderness toward all temporary manifestations. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you access this intimacy of shared impermanence. You recognize your fundamental kinship with all that passes. This recognition often transforms relationships through the special vulnerability it enables. You discover that acknowledging shared forgetting creates possibilities for connection unavailable to those still defending against impermanence. Part 74. The lightness of being. A special lightness comes from releasing the burden of being remembered. The weight of potential judgment by posterity lifts, allowing more spontaneous movement through life. Consider how much energy is consumed by managing potential future opinions of us. We continuously edit our actions and expressions with an eye toward how they might be perceived by imagined future audiences. This lightness extends beyond social performance to our internal relationship with ourselves. The need to construct and maintain a self worthy of remembrance creates considerable psychological weight. When this requirement dissolves, we become free to explore aspects of experience previously deemed incompatible with our rememberable identity. The rigid structures of consistent selfhood can relax into more fluid and responsive patterns. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you access this lightness of unburdened being. You release the weight of performing for posterity's judgment. This unburdening often creates immediate increases in energy, creativity, and joy. You discover that what appeared as existential terror, being forgotten, reveals itself as unexpected liberation when fully accepted. Part 75. The wisdom of insignificance. True wisdom may emerge precisely from recognizing your cosmic insignificance, not as cause for despair, but as context for more accurate self-perception and value assessment. Consider how many philosophical traditions point toward this recognition as the beginning of genuine understanding. From Socratic acknowledgement of ignorance to Buddhist anatta, wisdom often begins with recognizing what and who we are not. This wisdom of insignificance does not diminish, but clarifies your actual value and meaning. By releasing inflated cosmic importance, you can discover your genuine significance within appropriate scale. Perhaps your true value lies not in universal remembrance, but in the difference you make to specific beings during your brief shared time. This right-sized significance often proves more satisfying than grandiose but hollow notions of legacy. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you open yourself to this fundamental wisdom. You continuously adjust your self-perception to more accurately reflect your temporary, limited, but genuinely valuable nature. This practice gradually transforms your relationship to success, failure, praise, and criticism. You discover that accurate self-perception, far from diminishing your capabilities, enhances them by removing distorting influences. Part 76. The appreciation of finitude. Perhaps the most precious quality of existence is not its extension but its finitude. The limited nature of conscious experience creates its special intensity and significance. Consider how scarcity in other domains, rare elements, limited editions, brief seasonal availability, increases perceived value. The temporary nature of your existence operates similarly, creating preciousness through limitation. This appreciation extends beyond the finitude of physical life to the temporary nature of remembrance. Being eventually forgotten adds another dimension of scarcity that potentially enhances meaning. Perhaps the brief period during which you are remembered by those who knew you personally holds special significance precisely because of its temporary nature. Like seasonal blossoms, this limited period of remembrance may derive its beauty from its brevity. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can develop this appreciation for the finite nature of all experience. You recognize limitation not as obstacle to meaning, but as its very condition. This recognition often transforms resistance to temporal boundaries into gratitude for their role in creating significance. You discover that forgetting, like death itself, does not oppose meaning, but establishes the context within which meaning becomes possible. Part 77. The authenticity of temporality. Perhaps our most authentic mode of being acknowledges rather than denies our temporal nature. This authenticity emerges from alignment with, rather than resistance to, our actual condition. Consider how much energy is consumed by maintaining the fiction of permanence through legacy. This effort distorts our relationship to time, placing primary value in an imagined future rather than lived present. This authenticity of temporal being extends beyond individual psychology to our relationships and projects. When we acknowledge the temporary nature of all connections and creations, we relate to them more honestly. The relationship embraced for its present value rather than its permanent status often achieves greater depth. The project undertaken for its intrinsic worth rather than its lasting impact often attains greater integrity. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with the authentic temporality of human existence. You stop fighting against your actual condition and start living in accordance with it. This alignment often resolves the subtle but persistent discomfort that comes from maintaining fiction against reality. You discover that authenticity emerges not from securing remembrance, but from honest acknowledgement of its temporary nature. Part 78. The gift of transience. What if being forgotten constitutes not punishment but gift? Not failure but grace, the final release from the burden of persistent identity. Consider how exhausting it would be to maintain consistent selfhood for eternity. The continuous effort of coherent self-presentation would become a kind of hell rather than the heaven we imagine in eternal remembrance. This gift of transience extends beyond personal psychology to collective well-being. Imagine the stagnation of a culture unable to forget its past patterns and personalities. Such a society would become increasingly burdened by accumulated memory, unable to evolve new responses to changing conditions. The gift of forgetting creates essential space for renewal at both individual and cultural levels. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can recognize this gift in advance. You perceive forgetting not as future punishment, but as eventual liberation. This reframing often transforms relationship to legacy, from anxious grasping to grateful release. You discover that what appeared as existential threat reveals itself as cosmic grace when viewed from sufficient perspective. Part 79. The freedom of ordinariness. Special liberation comes from embracing your fundamental ordinariness, not as resignation, but as recognition of kinship with the vast majority of beings who have lived and been forgotten. Consider the egotism implicit in believing your remembrance should be exceptional when billions have been forgotten. This expectation of special treatment creates unnecessary suffering when reality inevitably disappoints it. This freedom of ordinariness extends beyond legacy concerns to all domains of life. When we release the need for exceptional status, we become available to the genuine value of common experience. The ordinary meal, conversation, or day contains richness invisible to those continuously seeking the extraordinary. Paradoxically, embracing ordinariness often reveals the extraordinary dimensions of supposedly common experience. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you embrace your fundamental kinship with ordinary humanity. You release the exhausting pursuit of exceptional remembrance. This acceptance often brings immediate relief from the burden of specialness. You discover that ordinary forgotten status, accepted fully, creates more freedom for authentic living than the continuous striving for exceptional remembrance. Part 80. The return to essence. Being forgotten represents not mere negation, but potential return to uncategorized essence. Not disappearance, but reabsorption into the unstructured potential from which we temporarily emerged. Consider how defining and remembering always involves reduction, the transformation of ineffable being into conceptual categories. To be forgotten is to be released from these reductions, returned to uncategorized possibility. This return to essence suggests a completion rather than interruption of life's journey. Like a river returning to the ocean, individual identity dissolves back into the source from which it arose. Perhaps this dissolution constitutes not loss but homecoming, the resolution of temporary separation into original wholeness. The cycle completes not through eternal preservation of separation, but through its eventual dissolution. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can anticipate this return with curiosity rather than dread. You perceive it not as erasure, but as completion, as return rather than end. This reframing often transforms relationship to forgetting, from resistance to acceptance or even welcome. You discover that what appeared as loss may actually be gain, the recovery of original wholeness beyond the limitations of defined identity. Part 81. The Quantum of Identity. Perhaps selfhood exists not as continuous entity, but as series of discrete moments, not a persistent thing, but a sequence of experiences conventionally unified through narrative. Consider how our sense of continuous identity requires elaborate narrative construction, connecting disparate experiences into coherent story. This story, though useful for practical purposes, may misrepresent the actual quantum nature of consciousness. This quantum perspective suggests that being forgotten merely acknowledges what is already true. The continuous self we imagine being remembered never actually existed as such. It was always a useful fiction, a narrative overlay on discrete experiences lacking inherent connection. Forgetting simply allows this fiction to dissolve, revealing the quantum nature of experience it temporarily concealed. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this quantum reality of selfhood. You recognize the constructed nature of continuous identity requiring remembrance. This recognition often brings liberation from the burden of maintaining narrative coherence. You discover that forgetting, far from opposing your true nature, actually reveals it by removing the fictional overlay of continuous selfhood. Part 82. The Economy of Attention. All remembrance operates within a finite economy of attention with necessary trade-offs. For someone to be remembered, countless others must be forgotten due to limited cognitive resources. Consider how even within a single life, the sharp remembrance of certain experiences requires the forgetting of others. Memory functions through selection rather than accumulation, forgetting the majority to preserve the minority. This economy extends to cultural memory, where similar limitations necessitate selective preservation. No culture could function while maintaining equal attention to every person and event from its past. The preservation of certain names and stories requires the forgetting of others, not through malice but through cognitive necessity. What we call history represents not comprehensive record but highly selective curation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you recognize your place within this natural economy of attention. You acknowledge the necessary limits that make remembrance itself possible. This recognition often brings compassion toward the systems of memory that cannot possibly preserve everyone. You discover that forgetting represents not failure, but participation in the selective process that enables memory itself to function. Part 83. The Paradox of Legacy. A strange paradox operates in the relationship between seeking legacy and achieving it. Those most desperate to be remembered often engage in behaviors that diminish their chances. Consider how preoccupation with legacy often produces self-conscious work lacking the authenticity that creates lasting impact. The artist who creates primarily to secure remembrance rarely produces work memorable enough to achieve it. This paradox extends beyond creative fields to all domains of human achievement. The leader focused primarily on historical judgment often makes worse decisions than one focused on present needs. The scientist concerned mainly with naming discoveries may miss the collaborative insights that create genuine breakthrough. Throughout human endeavor, concern with remembrance often undermines the very qualities that might merit it. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you position yourself on the productive side of this paradox. You create, lead, or discover without the distorting influence of legacy anxiety. This freedom from concern with remembrance often unleashes precisely the authentic engagement that creates meaningful impact. You discover that letting go of being remembered, paradoxically, often produces work more worthy of remembrance. Part 84. The Courage of Acceptance. Perhaps the greatest courage lies not in fighting against forgetting, but in fully accepting it. Not as resignation, but as clear-eyed recognition of reality requiring significant bravery to face. Consider how much easier it is to maintain comforting illusions of legacy than to confront the mathematical certainty of eventual erasure. The latter requires a valor rarely acknowledged but profoundly transformative when embodied. This courage creates possibility for a life of genuine presence rather than continuous performance. When we stop acting for imagined future audiences, authentic response to present circumstances becomes possible. The person who has accepted forgetting brings a different quality to their actions, more direct, more honest, less concerned with appearance. This directness often creates more significant impact than carefully curated behaviors designed to secure remembrance. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you practice this quiet but profound form of courage. You face what most spend their lives avoiding and find unexpected freedom in that confrontation. This courageous acceptance often transforms not just relationship to legacy, but to all aspects of existence. You discover that the courage to accept forgetting develops capacity for radical presence that enriches every dimension of experience. Part 85. The Weight of Remembrance. Consider how burdensome it would be to actually achieve the eternal remembrance so many desire. The pressure of perpetual judgment, the inability to evolve beyond fixed image. Famous figures often speak of the prison their public image creates, the exhaustion of maintaining consistent presentation. This burden extends infinitely in the imagined scenario of eternal remembrance. This weight would bind not just the remembered, but those who remember. The obligation to maintain memories of the dead creates duty that can inhibit full engagement with the present. Cultures excessively focused on ancestor remembrance often struggle with innovation and adaptation. The living can become prisoners of the remembered dead, their attention and energy consumed by maintenance of memory. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you spare both yourself and others this weight. You release yourself from the burden of consistent presentation and others from the obligation of remembrance. This mutual unburdening often creates immediate increases in freedom and energy. You discover that forgetting represents not failure, but liberation, the release of resources for new growth rather than perpetual preservation. Part 86. The Ecology of Identity. Our identities exist not as isolated phenomena, but as elements in complex relational systems. Not separate entities, but nodes in continuously evolving networks of relationship. Consider how your sense of self emerges through interaction with others, environment and culture. It does not exist independently, but as temporary manifestation of these intersecting influences. This ecological perspective suggests that being forgotten constitutes not erasure, but transformation. The influences that temporarily constellated as you continue in altered form throughout the system. Like nutrients cycling through ecological networks, the elements of your identity continue circulation in different configurations. What appears as disappearance from one perspective represents reconfiguration from another. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this ecological understanding of identity. You recognize yourself as temporary manifestation of ongoing processes rather than separate entity requiring preservation. This recognition often brings deep ecological comfort and sense of belonging. You discover that forgetting represents not annihilation, but participation in natural cycles of emergence and reconfiguration essential to all living systems. Part 87. The Horizon of Meaning. Perhaps meaning exists most authentically within the horizon of a single life, independent of remembrance. Not as legacy project, but as lived coherence, as pattern perceived by the experiencing consciousness itself. Consider how we find significance in connections and themes visible from our unique vantage point. These patterns of meaning require no external validation or preservation to justify their value. This horizon of personal meaning operates independently of legacy timeframes. It finds significance in relationships and experiences complete within lived experience. The love between parent and child needs no remembrance beyond their lifetimes to justify its profound meaning. The insight that transforms understanding requires no historical record to validate its significance to the one who experienced it. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can focus on meaning within this natural horizon. You invest in patterns of significance visible from your unique vantage point without requiring their eternal preservation. This investment often yields deeper satisfaction than pursuit of remembrance-dependent meaning. You discover that meaning contained within the horizon of lived experience often proves more reliable and substantial than meaning dependent on posthumous recognition. Part 88. The Quality of Time. Perhaps time should be measured by depth rather than duration, by intensity rather than extension. Not how long something lasts, but how fully it is experienced in each moment of its existence. Consider how a single moment of complete presence might contain more lived time than years of divided attention. This quality of temporal experience operates independently of clock time or calendar duration. This qualitative approach to temporality transforms the significance of being forgotten. If what matters is depth rather than duration, the eventual fading of memory becomes less threatening. The value of experience derives from its lived intensity, not its extension through remembrance. A life of profound presence needs no posthumous continuation to justify its worth. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can shift focus from temporal extension to temporal depth. You invest in the vertical dimension of time, intensity, presence, completeness, rather than the horizontal dimension of continuation. This reprioritization often transforms ordinary experience by removing the distraction of legacy concerns. You discover that a single moment fully lived contains more value than centuries of thin remembrance. Part 89. The Liberation from History. History itself can become a prison, binding us to patterns and expectations from the past. The dream of being remembered often represents desire to join our jailers rather than escape the prison. Consider how historical narratives constrain possibility, defining what can be imagined based on what has been recorded. To be forgotten is to be released from these constraints, returned to open possibility. This liberation extends beyond individual psychology to collective evolution. Cultures partially forget in order to evolve, releasing patterns that no longer serve current needs. The continuous clearing of memory creates space essential for adaptation and innovation. Without this liberation from history through partial forgetting, both individuals and societies would become increasingly rigid and unresponsive. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you participate consciously in this necessary liberation. You recognize forgetting not as failure, but as essential component of healthy development. This recognition often transforms relationship to both personal and cultural history. You discover that being forgotten represents not exclusion from history, but contribution to the vital processes of renewal that prevent history from becoming prison. Part 90. The Ownership Fallacy. Our desire to be remembered reflects a deeper assumption that we own our identities and achievements. This ownership claim extends beyond death through the vehicle of remembrance. Consider how strange this notion of posthumous ownership actually is when examined closely. How can the non-existent own anything, including memory of their previous existence? This fallacy of ownership extends to ideas, creations, and influences ascribed to individuals. The reality of all human achievement involves countless forgotten contributors and conditions. The identified creator or discoverer represents merely the visible node in vast networks of influence. What we call individual achievement always emerges from collective processes largely invisible in conventional attribution. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you begin releasing this fallacy of ownership. You recognize achievements not as personal possessions, but as temporary configurations you helped catalyze. This recognition often brings profound humility and gratitude, replacing anxiety about proper attribution. You discover that release from the ownership fallacy through acceptance of forgetting creates greater freedom for genuine contribution, unconstrained by credit concerns. Part 91. The Gift of Obscurity. Obscurity itself can be a precious gift, creating freedom unavailable to the closely observed, not as punishment, but as protection from the distorting influence of external judgment. Consider how public figures often speak with nostalgia about the freedom they experienced before fame. This liberty to experiment, fail, and evolve without documentation provides essential space for authentic development. This gift operates not just during life but in relationship to posthumous remembrance. To be forgotten after death extends similar protection from judgment by those who could not possibly understand your full context. It allows your actions and creations to be received on their own terms rather than filtered through narratives about their creator. The work can speak for itself without the distorting influence of biographical interpretation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you receive this gift in advance. You create with the freedom of anticipated obscurity rather than the constraint of imagined remembrance. This anticipatory reception often unleashes capacities for authenticity previously suppressed by legacy concerns. You discover that the gift of obscurity, embraced consciously, creates greater freedom for meaningful contribution than the pursuit of remembered recognition. Part 92. The Wholeness of Being. Perhaps our deepest fulfillment comes not from being remembered, but from experiencing wholeness. Not fragmented by concern for reception, but complete in each moment of existence. Consider how presence unifies the divided self, bringing disparate aspects of being into temporary harmony. This experience of integration needs no continuation beyond its moment to justify its profound value. This wholeness of being exists independently of external validation or remembrance. It derives from internal coherence rather than social recognition or posthumous reputation. The sense of rightness that comes from aligning action with deepest values requires no witness to establish its worth. It is complete in itself, needing no continuation through memory to justify its significance. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you remove a primary barrier to experiencing this wholeness. You stop dividing attention between present experience and concern for future remembrance. This unification often brings immediate increases in well-being and sense of meaning. You discover that wholeness of being in each moment, not remembrance across time, constitutes your deepest fulfillment. Part 93. The Mystery of Being. Perhaps the greatest gift of conscious existence is participation in the fundamental mystery of being, not as problem to be solved, but as wonder to be experienced. Consider how our obsession with remembrance often deflects attention from the astonishing fact of existence itself. We take for granted the miracle of consciousness while anxiously seeking its extension. This mystery does not require solution or preservation, but simply recognition and appreciation. It invites wonder rather than explanation, presence rather than continuation. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, points toward mystery that transcends individual identity or remembrance. To be at all, even temporarily, is to participate in this fundamental enigma of existence. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can redirect attention to this primary mystery. You stop distracting yourself with secondary concerns about remembrance. This attentional shift often reveals dimensions of experience previously obscured by legacy anxiety. You discover that participation in the mystery of being, even briefly and forgettably, offers fulfillment that no amount of remembrance could provide. Part 94. The Wisdom of Letting Go. Throughout nature, letting go appears not as failure but as essential wisdom. Not defeat but completion, the necessary conclusion to cycles of growth and development. Consider how trees release their leaves in autumn, how rivers release their waters to the sea. These natural processes of letting go enable renewal and continuation rather than preventing them. This wisdom extends to human development, where growth requires continuous release of previous states. The child must be partially forgotten for the adult to emerge. The adult must be partially forgotten for the elder to evolve. Each stage of development involves both preservation and forgetting, selective continuation and necessary release. Without this wisdom of letting go, developmental processes would stagnate in rigid preservation. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this fundamental wisdom of nature. You recognize forgetting not as tragedy, but as necessary completion of natural cycles. This alignment often brings profound ecological comfort and sense of rightness. You discover that being forgotten represents not failure or punishment, but participation in the ancient wisdom of letting go that permeates all natural systems. Part 95. The Return to Source. Perhaps being forgotten represents not disappearance, but return to the unmanifest source from which we temporarily emerged. Not extinction, but completion of a journey from formlessness to form and back again. Consider how many wisdom traditions describe cycles of manifestation and dissolution as natural cosmic process. Individual identity appears temporarily from unstructured potential and eventually returns to it. This return completes rather than interrupts the cycle of existence. Like a wave returning to the ocean, differentiated identity dissolves back into its source. The wave does not cease to exist, but returns to the undifferentiated state from which it arose. Similarly, the forgetting of individual identity represents not annihilation, but reabsorption into original wholeness. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can recognize this return as completion rather than interruption. You perceive forgetting not as failure, but as natural conclusion to the cycle of manifested identity. This recognition often brings deep spiritual comfort and sense of cosmic belonging. You discover that forgetting represents not punishment or tragedy, but the necessary completion of your journey from and back to Source. Part 96. The Liberation of Attention. Perhaps our greatest freedom lies in choosing where to invest our limited attention. Not in controlling outcomes, but in directing awareness toward what we truly value. Consider how much attention is consumed by managing how we appear to others, including imagined future others. This management diverts enormous resources from direct experience of what actually matters to us. This attentional liberation becomes possible when we release concern for how we will be remembered. The energy previously invested in legacy management becomes available for direct engagement with life. We stop performing for posterity and start experiencing for ourselves. This shift from presentation to presence often transforms ordinary experience by removing the filter of legacy concern. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you liberate attention for investment in present value. You redirect cognitive and emotional resources from future reception to current experience. This reallocation often creates immediate increases in life quality through deeper engagement. You discover that the freedom to direct attention toward what truly matters to you, regardless of how it will be remembered, constitutes your greatest available liberation. Part 97. The Dance of Existence. Perhaps life is less a journey toward destination than a dance to be performed with full presence. Not progress toward future goal, but continuous creative response to present music. Consider how dancers focus not on documentation of their performance, but on its execution. Their art exists in its momentary embodiment rather than its preservation. This metaphor of dance suggests different measure of life's value than remembrance. What matters is not whether the dance is recorded, but how fully it is performed. The quality of attention, responsiveness, and presence in each movement matters more than its documentation. A dance performed with complete absorption needs no audience or record to justify its worth. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can approach life as dance rather than monument building. You focus on the quality of your movement through time rather than its preservation in memory. This shift often transforms relationship to both ordinary and extraordinary experiences. You discover that life as dance, fully performed but eventually forgotten, offers fulfillment that no amount of remembrance could provide. Part 98. The Now of Eternity. Perhaps eternity exists not as endless time, but as the depth dimension available within each moment. Not horizontal extension, but vertical penetration, the infinity accessible through complete presence. Consider how moments of full awareness often contain a quality of timelessness, an escape from the usual experience of duration. These moments paradoxically emerge most readily when we have accepted our temporal nature rather than fighting against it. This vertical eternity requires no continuation through memory to establish its value. It is complete in itself, containing depths that transcend ordinary temporal measurement. Perhaps what we truly seek in wanting to be remembered is this quality of significance that exists outside linear time. If so, the path lies not in securing remembrance, but in accessing the depth dimension of present experience. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you remove the primary barrier to experiencing this now of eternity. You stop sacrificing vertical depth for horizontal extension through remembrance. This reprioritization often reveals dimensions of existence previously obscured by legacy anxiety. You discover that eternity is available not through being remembered across time, but through penetrating the infinite depth available within each moment. Part 99. The Gift of Anonymity. Consider the special freedom available to those who create without signature, who act without claiming credit. This anonymity allows for pure expression, unconstrained by consistency with previous identity. The anonymous creator accesses dimensions of authenticity often unavailable to those concerned with attribution. Their work emerges from necessity rather than ego, from intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation. This gift extends beyond artistic creation to all domains of human action and relationship. The help offered without recognition often contains a purity missing from more visible giving. The insight shared without attribution frequently transmits more effectively than claimed wisdom. Throughout human experience, anonymity creates possibilities for authenticity that attribution often constrains. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you can access this gift of anonymity during your lifetime. You create and contribute as if already anonymous, concerned with intrinsic value rather than attribution. This anticipatory anonymity often unleashes capacities for authenticity previously suppressed by identity maintenance. You discover that forgotten status, embraced in advance, creates freedom for expression and action unavailable to those still struggling for remembered recognition. Part 100. The Eternal Now. In the final analysis, perhaps now is all that ever exists or has intrinsic value. Not past, not future, but the continuously unfolding present moment of conscious experience. Consider how both memory and anticipation exist only as present phenomena, as current mental events. The past exists only as remembered now, the future exists only as imagined now. This eternal now perspective transforms the significance of being forgotten. If only present consciousness has primary reality, remembrance represents merely one possible content of future present moments. The value of your existence derives not from future mental events referencing you, but from the quality of consciousness you experience directly. What matters is not whether you occupy space in others' future awareness, but how fully you inhabit your own present awareness. By accepting that you will be forgotten, you align yourself with this fundamental truth of the eternal now. You invest in the only reality directly available to you, present conscious experience. This alignment often resolves the subtle but persistent suffering created by focusing on imagined futures rather than actual present. You discover that the eternal now, fully inhabited regardless of future remembrance, offers fulfillment that no amount of posthumous recognition could provide.
Thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, like, and comment. On other platforms, double tap the screen so we can spread this message. Be present. Life is good.